here it is. This is my panel. I can't wait, and I can't promise you that you will not want to disappear for a second or two. You're going to want to stay right where you are. This is the changing face of marketing and advertising. In light of everything going on in the world, how appropriate that we would have a chat about how the color of an industry and its work product is changing to better reflect the many faces in the world around us. But it first starts with having people of color at the table to influence the narrative. So that's what we've created for you all today. Move over, Jada Pinkett and Red Table Talks. This is Nikki's Emma Table Talk. And with us today, we have Lucinda Martinez, the newly promoted EVP of Multicultural Marketing, Brand, and Inclusion Strategy at WarnerMedia. We also have Rohan Kumar, the GVP of Digital Marketing at Spectrum. And last, but certainly not least, Monique Nelson, the chairwoman and CEO of Uniworld Group. Thank you all for being here. I want to say a round of applause that we made it. And so I am going to just jump right in. As you all know, people have your bios, they have your LinkedIn, they know how to get your information. So we were not going to spend a whole lot of time going through bios, not one line of it. They'll find out who you are if they haven't already, and we're just going to jump right in. So my first question, I'm going to toss it to Monique. All of you will answer though. What inspired your career path? Monique?
Wow, it's every time you put it out there, it's so loaded. Primarily because I feel like I've been on this path my whole life. I just told this story to Can Lion in that I had a bad experience as a first grader, being, called the N-word, and at 6 years old, what you had to deal with, what that meant in a primarily white environment meant a lot from a family perspective, from how I had to deal every day. But ultimately, I feel like inclusion has been chasing me my whole life. I had that incident, but ultimately then went into the Posse program. And I'm a Posse alum, which is all about inclusion at the collegiate level, which then kind of catapulted me into a global role at Motorola that was all about culture inclusion from Asia. I worked and spent a great deal of time in Seoul, Korea, as well as China, in Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. I was then able to spend a tremendous amount of time in South America, primarily in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And then my last international assignment took me to Milan, Italy, where I was the manager of advertising and marketing for Motorola for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I really feel like as I arrived at Uniworld in 2007, I was primed and ready with a cultural lens, a global cultural lens that really made it imperative that you look at culture, customs, what people think are important far more than you do just a nation. So what inspired me to do this? Clearly, everything that I've done in my life has been around inclusion, around cultural competency and cultural fluency to bring brands to life.
Well, Monique, I'm not sure if you heard, but a little earlier in my intro, I gave permission to everyone who is in our virtual room that they can use their first voice and not their second. And I know as executives of color, we know too well what that means. So I'm going to toss it over to Rohan simply because I know that you are our only male on the panel and we are going to show you some love and not make this all about ladies. Could you share with us what was it that inspired your career path?
Absolutely. And I'd like to thank you for having me. And it's really exciting to have the opportunity to get to be on this panel. I'm truly humbled and to get a chance to speak to all of you incredible Emma constituents. But, what inspired my career? Nikki did telegraph this question, and it's a lot harder to answer than you realize. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And it really came down to, for me, is I am a byproduct of my dad's journey to America. So I'm first generation. I was born in the U.S., but my dad immigrated here in 1958. And he came with an education but no safety net. And so my dad lived a life that had limited risk-taking opportunities. And I watched him kind of go through his career. And for me, what that did, watching how he had to handle himself and how he couldn't take every opportunity that might have crossed his path or wasn't given every opportunity that other people were, I kind of embraced that and decided to take a path filled with risk. And it was also sprinkled with overconfidence and a little bit of impatience. And so I actually, I started my career in financial services, but I looked around the room and I realized that, it was going to be really hard. And this was a while ago, but it was going to be really hard for me to be patient enough to ever be a contributor in that industry. Like, again, it kind of goes back to the impatience. And I looked around and I was like, everyone here is really old. And I didn't want to wait to be old to have a voice at the company. And so that led me to the startup world. So I'd spent the last 15 years taking risks, moving to numerous startups, moving 6 different times, till eventually I found myself at a startup company where Charter was actually my client. And I ended up actually doing a good enough job for them that when the opportunity presented itself, they actually asked me to join the company. That's kind of my journey in a nutshell.
And the lesson there is you never know who you're going to meet. You never know who's watching you, and the extent to which you didn't see that as a temporary opportunity. You came with your all, and then lo and behold, look where you're working now. Something to be said for that. All right, now, Ms. Lucinda, I want to know what inspired your career path, Ladybug.
Well, similar to Rohan, I mean, I'm a first generation Dominican parents that came here during at the time was a political persecution of the dictator of the time, which was Trujillo. And so I was born not fully in that half world, right? Where you're considered or told you're never American enough, or you're never Latino enough when you're in DR. So I guess for me, and because my parents didn't speak English, I think that the theme throughout my life was me always as a translator. I always felt like I was in the middle trying to explain things, either to help my parents understand something, where it be language or whether it was culture. And I realized that ultimately defined my career choices. And ultimately, even to this day, I consider myself very much of a translator. I've chosen to be in corporate America and take roles where over time I started in sales, had a lot of success there, because especially as a person of color, because when you always want to take race off the table and you tend to pick jobs where it becomes very clear what your performance is, and sales is one where it's very difficult to muddy that up. You're paid and you're incentivized and you're rewarded based on what you produce. So we do well in those types of scenarios. But over time, I realized that as a translator was really where I felt like I gave or made the biggest contribution of all, not just for myself, but also for the business, which is that no one was really paying attention to what I thought was the largest opportunity market. And that ended up being my path.
I should have shared with the audience, I guess, a little bit that we have some relationships here that in the course of for some 15 years. And so the idea of knowing that you all have had challenges in your career, because there's the skin that we're in that we can't take off. We walk into a room, it's what we walk in with. And Monique, when you were sharing at a young age that you even had to hear that word, then I'm sure whether someone had explained it to you or your parents took the time to pull you to the side to say, by the way, there are some really vicious and nasty words that can be used to describe you, but don't internalize it. How have you, Monique, through the years, worked through challenges that you recognize you're walking into the room with it? How do you counter that so that it doesn't interfere with your performance? Because I agree with Lucinda, and I don't know that I thought of that before, There's your performance and the things that can be measured so that it doesn't feel personal when we're talking about evaluating one's performance and how quickly you move up. When I think about where you are in your career, the places you've been, the places you've traveled, how does that all come together for you when you walk into a room?
Well, the beautiful part about being in the seat that I'm in now and kind of looking back, right, the 2020 clarity that you get from hindsight is that I always steeped everything I did in data and really making sure that I grounded my outcomes in a place where everyone could understand and agree. That's the hardest part, right? Because it's really, if I could say, the challenges that I've seen in my career have really surrounded the accountability portion of any scenario. So everybody's very clear. To Lucinda's point, we can see the opportunity. We'll take a few actions, but ultimately we don't hold ourselves truly accountable to what those outcomes are. So when you introduce that into a scenario with a brand or a client, all of a sudden it becomes very, very clear what we're all responsible for, and then ultimately how we move these things forward. The passion around this space has come from exactly that we're the growth, we're the engine. We will be, the value add that everyone is looking for. And I found that it was an appropriate time to make this my focus for everything that we do, both internally and externally, and ultimately adding that value to everything that we do with a lens of cultural competency and fluency.
It's been my experience that our younger audiences who look like us, they need to see their faces in high places to know that it's even possible for them. So Lucinda, I'm gonna throw this to you. Rohan, I see you. Lucinda, I'm gonna throw this to you. Pre-COVID-19, it was all about bite-sized consumption, Quibi. As we know, attention spans are short, and certainly for the audience that we're appealing to right now, I think it's like 8 seconds is all we get. How are you revisiting this, whether it's through data that you get from your research and analytics team? How are you keeping audiences engaged? Certainly these last 4 months where we've not had the luxury of being in person with each other, you've had to, I'm sure, get very creative about how to reach people through virtual arenas as opposed to buses, because people weren't on the bus. Trains, people weren't on the train. And I know, historically speaking, for HBO, we don't necessarily do ads. We have other language for that. But I'd love for you to explain, how are you engaging with this next generation in light of where we've been these last few months?
Well, the good news is that I have a very talented team. We work with really amazing agencies as well. But it was a challenge. I mean, we had to first, with very little notice, absolutely no preparation. I also have an entire creative service team. So we had to bring everything and make sure that everyone had computers, had access, had the ability to download and upload very large files. Just the simple operational stuff was just the biggest challenge. And then we were in the middle of campaigns, like you said. I mean, we still always, the good news is we've always used digital. We've always used influencer marketing. We always use experiential, and we just quickly pivoted to, like you said, virtual opportunities. I'll give you a good example. We were right in the middle of booking Insecure. We were going to do 5 cities, 5 block parties in person where all the talent was going to come. And we immediately had to switch that to a virtual scenario, where we had basically influencers created their own watch parties, because we didn't also want to feel like as a brand, we were encouraging people to gather when that wasn't, when clearly that's no longer safe. So we were able to do that through live and Instagram Live. We had the cast show up, bring in other cast members. We had DJs, we had D-Nice, we sent influencers kits with how to watch the show at home. And we went and we got the same number of impressions. We were surprised to find out even more impressions than when we did live events that were 3 times the cost, because everybody was home. You have a captured audience. So viewership is up. People are home. They need to see content. So this is actually a good business to be in a pandemic from the standpoint of eyeballs. But it wasn't an easy feat. And thankfully, we have always utilize all the elements of the marketing mix. And in this case, that came in handy.
And Rohan, if you could, I know, I'm so glad that Lucinda mentioned D Nice, because if we think about someone who's completely had to reinvent themselves and think creatively about how to still reach an audience, where clearly for him, a lot of his bread and butter came from being in person and having parties all over the world and DJing for the likes of the Obamas. And so think about who his audience is and the fact that he was able to create Club Quarantine in the midst of what would have been feeling heavy and everyone feeling very much alone and at home. Think about what it is that you do, Rohan. And if you could share a bit with our audience what you do on a day-to-day, if you can just give us a peek into what your day looks like and how you've been had to flex or pivot, as it were, in your career.
Absolutely. So I think that probably not just for me, but for everyone, like the pandemic really is like a hopefully once in a lifetime event, that it really does change everything. And so ultimately, it's hard to think what it didn't change. But when I look at it from like if I start top down, the company I work for those of you who don't know, Charter is it's a connectivity company. Our primary product that most people would engage with is our internet product. And it's an essential product. It's an essential service. And during the pandemic, it was more important than ever that the company kept moving and kept allowing for our customers to be able to access high-speed, reliable internet. And so the company and the leadership of the company, I was so proud of how they navigated what has to be the most complex management situation, in terms of making sure that while there are so many unknowns, that they moved the ball forward and made sure that the service we provided, maintained, and that we were able to do things like provide free access and discounted access and debt forgiveness in very uncertain times for a large part of our footprint. When I think about it more specifically for my department, the best word I can use is adapt. We had to adapt. And a good example of it is I'm not just responsible for what's traditional digital marketing. Like there's all the stuff like buying search ads and, buying, Facebook ads and media and the like, but I'm also responsible for our websites and all the website development. And that's actually a very complex process, where there was a point in time, if you had told my teams that, hey, we're going to do an entire plan for the next 3 months, all virtual. There'll be 100, 150 people in virtual rooms, and we're going to put together the business requirements, the technical requirements, and we're going to execute an entire redesign or a launch of a campaign. If I had said that in the past, they would have said I was crazy. But due to the pandemic and what it does to the business, we had to do that for the safety and care of our people. We had to provide them the adequate social distancing while we still did our jobs to provide that essential service. So, things that, and it's funny because I used to, from a budget perspective, whenever you're looking at people's budgets, you say, do we have to do these all in person? Does everyone have to be there? It used to be absolutely. And then when it actually isn't an option any longer, you are, it's fascinating what you're able to do. So I've been really blown away by the productivity of the team I run and their ability to continue to deliver, almost ahead of schedule, the same quality and product that we had done before. And then when I get even lower from like the team perspective, like my day, I used to live in conference rooms. I go from one meeting to another. And the only thing that's changed now is I'm on calls all day long, kind of like this one, where I'm moving from one video conference to another video conference. And we're very fortunate that we exist in a time where the technology exists, where everyone can be in a room to collaborate still, like the way that we like to. But yeah, that's kind of how things have been going. And candidly, I really, while the new way of how we've been working is productive, I do miss the old way. And I love being in the rooms with my teams, and I miss it desperately. And I hope I can get back to that at some point in the not too distant future, though it, there doesn't seem to be much of a light on the end of that.
All right, now I'm going to choose to hear that as you are a people person, Rohan, as am I. I wish I'd given you all hugs at the beginning of this session because I'm a hugger. I too get energy from others. And so just imagine I'm sending you a virtual hug in the event that you're right and we're not able to do in-person gatherings for quite some time. So just know that the chat room is popping and I've got already a boatload of questions from our audience, but I'm gonna get through my questions selfishly and then I'm gonna jump right to theirs. Monique, what COVID-19 and racism have in common? People don't believe they exist if they haven't been affected personally. I'm saying that again. What COVID-19 and racism have in common, people don't believe they exist if they haven't been affected personally. It seems like black and brown people all over the news and social outlets are being very vocal about their experiences. And though I know for some of us, depending on what generation we're a part of, we've been told we don't have those conversations at work. You suck it up, you come home, you tell it to the pillow, you tell it to your pastor, pillow or pastor, but you don't have the conversation about race, ethnicity, and religion, certainly not politics in the office. What if you could describe, in light of the role that you're in and the team that you have, how has this impacted your role? And do you feel like you carry that with you wherever you go? Because you are the leader of your organization, and I'm sure everyone wants a piece of what your experiences have been. I know you, so I know your social calendar and your professional calendar these days is off the hook because everyone's looking for the solve. They want to figure out how to remedy us of what I think we've been socialized to believe for so long. How are you working through that in light of your role and thinking about your team?
So, I mean, the great part is this is actually what we've always, done. We've always believed that the total person shows up everywhere. And we were unapologetically that way before COVID. And we are even more about that now. I mean, we are doubling down on our purpose. And there's a way to discuss what we would traditionally call taboo subjects in a way that matter. And we do that globally, right? Part of the reason I brought up my global background is that if I was working in Dubai, there was no way I was going to do the same campaign that I did in Italy. Dubai did have religious customs, other dynamics that we had to think about, and we would never discount those markers and or accommodations for that culture. So the fact that we do that differently here has always been a challenge for me, and that's part of the reason that we try to dimensionalize the way we see the world, and even more so now as we look at COVID. It's only unearthed and revealed the already, disparities that were already there. And those disparities do come in the form of, and I would just say it as mental anguish, by not being able to bring your entire self to work and be able to have those conversations and talk about how it affects the work, especially the work that we do from an advertising, marketing, and media perspective. We do shape how people see themselves, we shape how people conduct themselves, and ultimately we will reflect and or cover up the things that are truly important. So right now, my counsel has been open it up, be transparent. Quietly, you do this within your networks anyway. It's just a matter of whether or not that's happening on the golf course or if that can actually happen in the workplace. And we're trying to bridge that gap every day to say a total human is a productive human and it shows value.
Oh, did you just say a total human is a productive human?
Absolutely. I don't know anybody that's not.
Well, Lucinda, there's a question here that I can't ignore. I can't wait to get to it. How can we use marketing and advertising to highlight the needs of our communities, which are often ignored?
Well, actually, if you're authentically targeting and super serving your audience, you can't do one without the other. I mean, to Monique's point, and this is, I have a different way of putting it, which is Integrity, the definition of integrity actually really is when your personal life, who you are at work, everything, and the way that you show up is fully integrated, because otherwise you're serving no one. If you're one person at work, one person at home, it's not only is it stressful, but like as Monique put it, it's not productive. And the same thing applies to marketing, because if marketing is all about bringing products and services to life for people in a way that they can identify them and want to consume them because they're relevant to them, then you can't do that without really being immersed in the culture. And if you come from a disenfranchised minority culture, by definition, you're looking for companies that care about the things that they care about or that we care about. So a lot of my job is to ensure that we have authenticity in our storytellers, in our creators, and thereby then our marketing. And so much of the work that we do, especially in multicultural marketing, there's always a social justice bent to it, or there's always a relevancy to the community. There's always an impact to the community. I always like to say that we market from the inside out and not from the outside in. I like to say that the differences between general marketing, or like what I like to call multicultural marketing, is that we're not interested in reaching you as much as we're interested in touching you. And reaching does not equal touching. And you cannot do that if you also aren't committed through your work, through the stories that you tell, because as we heard earlier, more than, I think it's 80% of the messages that are received or taken, or education, happens through media. So media is actually more responsible than our own education system in educating consumers. So you have to be really intentional and be really careful about the stories you put out in the world. So we're involved, even though we're in marketing, we meet the people in the stories the moment they're greenlit. And we start talking to production, and we start talking to the creators of the shows, and we ask, the question in the room is, well, what was your intention when creating this show? And we need to understand that, so then we know how to market that to consumers. And, I'm proud to say that most of the times we get it right. And you see it in the powerful stories you tell, that you see, but we also see it in the campaigns that we develop.
Lucinda, while I have you, how has the Black Lives Matter movement affected your marketing campaigns, social media voice, your push out transparency reports? What advice do you have for others to take on how to push that agenda without it becoming political?
Well, the key thing is that people, is like what you said earlier, right? It exists. Like, first, there has to be an understanding that racism exists. There has to be an understanding that these issues are not new issues. There has to be an understanding. For me personally, I self-identify as an Afro-Latina. I have a Black son, and a Black daughter. So to see the death of George Floyd and hear him call his mother, even though she's dead, broke me to a million pieces. And that was a scenario I had never planned. I talked to my son about police interactions, because you can't raise a Black son without preparing him for what could happen. I wouldn't be a good mother if I did that. So that, to me, tripped me up, just even in processing it. So here I was, personally almost paralyzed by what I saw, processing, affected in a way that, on top of COVID. So to me, this was a compounded situation. And then now I'm being the one everyone is turning to in the company for answers. And the first thing to me was that you cannot look at this as a bottom line. You got to look at this now as what's the right thing to do. And this moment requires what I called, and I said in that moment, this moment calls for courageous leadership. So the first thing I need everyone to do is just to have courage. And the first courage you have to have is accept. And mostly people were just scared. Management is just scared of saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing. And oftentimes the result of that is they do nothing. They just freeze. So for me, it was the first thing we need to do is we need to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter. I'm putting the hashtag out there. I'm not asking for permission. We're going to do this. And then we need to know what are the donations, what are the associations, because we have always partnered with Color of Change. We had always partnered with many organizations. We've given for many years, but now this was a moment where you had to acknowledge the support that wasn't just financial, but also that part of the cause, that we're behind that disenfranchisement of people of color and the abuse of people of color in this way. It's just not okay. And as a company, it's okay to say that. So yes, so all the responses around that, then making sure that all the content, we have a rich storytelling library of content, making it all available, putting it out for free. I'm making sure that we put things behind the paywall so people understood that these stories are important. We didn't want to be triggering. We also wanted to be responsible. When you put stuff out there, we don't need a bunch of triggering, what I call Black rage content. We also need to balance that with Black joy. We create a lot of content that's also about entertaining. We need that too. We need to also be responsible around that we are not making a situation worse, but we are educating, but also trying to make things a little better. And like earlier was said, transparency is one of them. Let's show all the people of color and creators that we bring to the table. I mean, this year we have Misha Green, who's coming out with Lovecraft Country, one of the most amazing shows I've ever seen, that's going to come out in August. We just had Michaela Cole out of London. We had Legendary. So we had, I felt like we also had a great ring. We had Insecure, one of the best seasons ever. And so I felt like this was a great balance of all the content that we have that speaks to the Black experience from every single direction. And I felt like it was a good moment for us, and we let that moment speak for itself. We aired Watchmen, and yes, we aired Watchmen for free on Juneteenth weekend, because the entire, with Regina King, because that entire content was about, was very, very relevant to that moment. So we let the content speak for itself. And we found that was powerful.
I happen to know firsthand, having been and being an executive of color, we often find ourselves, and Rohan and I have had this conversation, believe it or not, just in the short time that we've connected, ad nauseum, right? To think about whether you lead with, I'm an executive of color, or I'm an executive that just so happens to be of color. And so, Rohan, for you, on investment and inclusion, do you have any tips or metrics that at a high level can help with the message that inclusion actually equals a return on one's investment? And how to balance your own authenticity, meaning i.e. your first voice, while also maintaining appropriateness in a corporate setting? And I know we talked about your dad and your dad's experiences, so if you could merge the two just a bit, that would be awesome.
Sure. You know, I think I have to break your question up into two pieces. Like the first piece is about the metrics behind us, the metrics behind diversity. And, you know, ultimately, the fact of the matter is it's not, it's very easy to point to. I can't get into the specific dollars and cents of it, but I can tell you that it's a material part of our business. The multicultural audience is the fastest growing in the country, and they are the drivers of the economy. And so ultimately, we possess a extremely powerful voice with our dollars. And for companies, like, so if I break it into, like, from a marketing perspective, it's in a marketplace you can't ignore. You'd be foolish to. And that is a lot of power for us in the community, but it's also an opportunity for those of us that are marketing our products and services. And so, like, it's absolutely, for every company, an important segment, and one that cannot be ignored. And you're seeing it reflected in the way that people are now evolving their plans. And, you know, to kind of tie it back to, you know, my parents and, like, their story, you know, in the 80s, there was no brown people on TV, really. There was no targeting that differentiated the messaging for the content that they wanted. There was no one creating the content that they wanted to see. There was a very little. They were just asked to fit within a bucket. And now it's very much, it's not equal, but it's definitely starting to move in a better direction, where we are including and diversifying and creating for this high growth audience that's extremely valuable for the future and is the future. And so I'm very much happy to say that, you know, we're doing it with everything that I do, but that it's happening more and more. Kind of like the stuff I do on the digital side, though it's still in its infancy. There's still a long way to go. Like a lot has been done, but there's still much that needs to be done because the balance is still not there. Does that answer your question?
You sure did. And to that end, Rohan, before I have one more for you.
Sure.
What would you say are the most effective and best ways to test a potential marketing campaign? What do you first consider prior to releasing a campaign to the public?
That is a fantastic question. And, you know, the beautiful thing about what I do in the digital world is you don't have to make material, like traditional material investments to test something. I could, you know, today we could come up with an idea. I could send it to my creative team. They could, you know, storyboard a couple of things. We go through, get our approvals, and I could have it live in 2 days, tops. And so the actual barrier to testing digitally is almost nothing now. It's just about how agile you are as a company from an approvals process more than from an actual technical standpoint. So when it comes down to testing, like media can be a little bit different because ultimately you have to go through like bureaucracy of contracts and the like. But when it comes to like the way we create campaigns, like it's very much just like sitting down and strategically thinking about an opportunity, and then you go through the various ways that you could address that opportunity, and you use your experience. You know, you have a diverse group of people that are sitting in the room that you're thinking about how you want to address the problem, and using experience and wisdom, hopefully, you think about your previous campaigns that worked and why they didn't work is actually probably more important versus what did work. And you take all those data points and you feed it into your model of what are we going to try to accomplish now? And then you get it out there. And it's actually so much easier than it used to be digitally because, again, you can go and you can test a campaign on Google or Facebook for $100. There's not the same like we obviously do things a little bit larger scale, but an individual could test an idea if they have it. The barrier to advertising has almost been removed due to a couple of very large, companies like Google and Facebook. So it's not as hard as it used to be. Like if you're doing broad, large scale things, kind of like in the world of Lucinda or a lot of Monique's clients, which are huge CPG or major, advertisers, and they're coming up with massive campaigns, then they're going to do things like, and I could let them speak for themselves on this, they could do their panels, they could go through their research, they could do all sorts of sample testing to kind of get to a place where they get comfortable. But then ultimately there are people like us, there are media and advertising leaders that have to make a decision. There's no guarantee, no matter how confident you are. As a matter of fact, when you're really confident on something, it's actually kind of a scary sign. The biggest wins I've had are the things that I didn't know if they were going to work or not, and they ended up surprising me, and you end up learning from them.
Which I love that you went there around, you didn't quite use this language, but my takeaway is you were willing to take risks. And when I think about the three of you, both the skin you're in, the walk you've had, because we are the sum total of our experiences, for better or worse, we carry it with us. We all have baggage that we take with us. Some of us are more self-aware than others. When I think about the pressure at times to be all things to all people, and being mindful of how confidence sometimes can actually translate, depending on the community you're in, depending on who else is in the room. Some of us think we're a little smarter than others. And for those of us that have to get up twice as early, for those of us that do not go to bed with our counterparts because we're still working hard to show that we have a space at the table, even if we've had to Brody our way to get to the table, we're there. So now I want to shift for just a moment and then I'll come back to the business. Part of this conference is giving our fellows and alums and anyone, frankly, who needs it, a bit of a mental break from what's on the news and from what we're seeing the minute we open up our browser, whether it's on Instagram or on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Could you please share with me, and I'm going to toss this to you, Monique, how have you managed your mental health in light of everything that is going on in the world? I think we've prepared our fellows, we've certainly prepared our alums to career focus, think about what they're doing, short-term plan, long-term plan. Part of our goal with the staff at the foundation is not just getting them ready for their careers, but being very mindful of how to keep them in their heads. So where we sometimes can physically retreat to get our minds right, to get our acts together, where do you go in your head when you have to get your mind right and your face right, because everything is now on video, which means people are seeing you in ways they couldn't see you before.
Right.
Working through that?
So funny enough, we've developed a framework because that's the only way I know how to live and work. And we've really talked about this as a plus environment. And when we say plus, we mean people living under stress. And it is a constant stress. It is something that you are waking up with. You are living with it all day. You are going to sleep with it. You now have, if you have small children like I do, you've got the pressure of, their well-being. And the first thing I can just tell everyone to do is what I do in the morning. And I've encouraged everyone on my team to do so, is to do what we call a daily design. And that is really taking every day and giving yourself a purpose and a reason for what today will bring, and keeping it as something that is positive, uplifting, and that you can keep in front of you, because it is so trying. There is so much competing for you in this moment. You want to be amazing at your job, but you also are like, I'm doing all of this in my bedroom. How is that possible? Some folks are living in a 500 square foot, studio apartment. Some people live on a farm, and there's everything in between. And getting back to your question before, it is about your total self, right? And that is inclusive of your mental health, giving yourself a break, scheduling in your lunch, making sure that you maybe can take a walk with your meeting. Some of my meetings, if they're, they can be audio only, and I will ask people, hey, why don't you go outside and let's do our catch up during a walk, to just be able to express yourself, give yourself some room. And ultimately, I'm asking everyone in this moment to give everyone grace. No one taught us how to manage this situation. I'm working a lot with CEOs and giving them grace to say, you weren't trained to do this. And if you can show me the MBA course or the business class or whoever told you how to manage through a crisis, which is what we're in, then I'd love to get it. But we haven't. So as leaders, we have to use our empathy button. We have to open up our ears. They call them happy ears. Let's listen to what our people are telling us. And then let's react accordingly, and make sure that we are building safe spaces for people to have healthy and happy engagements, not only at home, but at work.
Oh my God, Monique, I don't even know if you were here earlier. We started with yoga and meditation in the spirit of doing just that, self-care. And I don't know that we take the time to carve out to teach self-care. And I oversee development, okay? And the idea of creating programs for people to be able to check out of the physical what's happening and get with what's happening in their heads. It's the classic, put the mask on you first. That's what they tell you on the plane, right? You have to take care of you first, because if you don't, you can't take care of anyone else. And you're right. I don't remember learning how to do that at Harvard. I don't remember learning how to do that at any training program I then attended thereafter when I graduated from Harvard. And I've been back a few times for some programs, and that's never on the agenda. So thank you for that. And so I'm going to toss this to Lucinda, and then Rohan, I'm coming right back to you. So just prepare yourself. Lucinda, talk to me about anxieties and fears, because I know we go back a long, long way. We've talked each other off the ledge more times than I care to count. I'm not ashamed to admit that I've called you at 5 a.m. to have counsel sessions, because that's what we do for each other when we're in community. How do you manage those anxieties and fears that we must all feel just by virtue of stepping into an environment where we're not always the majority. How do you manage that given the role you're in and the people that you take care of, both at home and at work? Because we know executives of color in whatever office we're in, whether people know it or not, secrets out, everyone to us to talk to us about what's not going well in their organization. So if you ever are not clued in or you don't know, you go find your senior executives of color and they'll tell you what your company report card is for what type of an inclusive environment we are in. And on that note, I'm going to stop. Lucinda.
Well, honestly, it's been hard. I had no preparation for being in a situation where I am leading a bunch of teams through a pandemic while cooking 3 meals and kids at home that are supposed to be online learning. So this has been, I am completely overwhelmed. It's really the best way for me to think about it. And I realized that I have really good weeks and I'm like, oh, I'm going to run every morning. I'm going to do, and then there are days I'm just too exhausted to do anything. So what I realize is that there's a lesson in all this. And there are a lot of blessings too that have come with it, which is the amount of time. My family matters to me more than anything. So we've had time together I never realized we needed. So that's great. On the second thing too, is that I realized that this is almost like the earth asking for a timeout, because I think I also learned that we're not supposed to be doing or working in the way that we had been working. Because, you know, on a week like this, I would be flying to LA, grabbing an overnight flight so that I can still be there to catch one of my son's basketball games, run up to London to do a meeting, you know, take another flight. Like if this was live, I'd probably be flying, trying to make it to this panel. So that part to me is like, wow, we're able to do all these things and we've come up with solutions in a way that I think is good. And then other days it's just that there's no break. There's no break between work and home because you're working at home all the time. So I realize that that's problematic, right? Because then you have to kind of figure out what that stop is for you. And then also just health-wise, like you have to figure out, and like Monique said earlier, your ability to do yoga could be a problem if you have 5 roommates in a 2-bedroom in New York City, right? So so you have to find something else that clears your mind. But yeah, self-care, putting yourself first, but also letting it go. Like I finally realized, I mean, I think I've gained like 15 pounds and I thought, shouldn't I be losing weight? And finally I let it go. I was like, you know what? We are not working while there's a pandemic. We're trying to work while we're living through a pandemic. So this means that there are some really good things that come with that. And then there's some really bad things that come with that. But you have to stay focused. The most important thing is to stay healthy. The most important thing is to make sure you're not doing things that could compromise our health, especially in communities of color is hitting harder. And also people think that, oh, if I get it, then I'm better. I said, there's still a lot, the jury's still out on the impact of this, the damage and the permanent damage it does on some people's health. So just because you survived it doesn't mean, you know, you want to get it. And so to me, it's been tough. I'm not gonna paint a rosy picture because I have some good weeks and I have some bad weeks.
And that's why I love you, because you bring your whole self to whatever room you walk into. And I learned that years ago when I started at HBO, that was your hallway reputation. And we all know what hallway reputation is, right? It's the things people say about you when you're not in the room. It's how people really feel about you, and you may not even know. Lucinda, your hallway reputation aligns with who you are. I can say that out loud. So I really appreciate your answer.
Oh, and the other thing is, I really, and I think somebody said it earlier, I can't remember who, I really miss my team. Like you forget how much of you derive from, you know, your crew. Like that's my crew. And I know that it's hard for them. I know they're hurting. I know I'm hurting. And we're not able to feed from each other. We're not able to inspire or ideate, especially in marketing, because it's very creative. So not being able to create in teams is difficult. And then also, you know, we were part of a larger reorg where we started to meet new teams that are now not interacting. And we're finding now that over time, the ability to work through conflict is very difficult when you don't have interaction. So people can stay in a conflict mode longer than get it resolved when you have to see everybody every day. So we're finding some interesting dynamics around that. And in terms of how that's working, it's really hard to onboard people and hire people and then bring them onto a team that then never ever get to that don't have the gelling that already happened and feel isolated from the gelling of the team because they don't have that opportunity to do that. And so this is like, we're still learning as we go, and there's no end in sight for this. So I think it's important that people take time off. It's important that people are honest when they need to disconnect. But I'm finding that people feel that because they feel like more obligated to show they're productive because of this time. And that's becoming almost detrimental and dangerous. So we also have to just sort of figure out the balance. Like, we need vacation. I hadn't taken any time off since December, and I didn't even notice. And I was burning out. So I realized that, no, I need a few days. I'm going to disconnect, and I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm out of here.
Do it.
Oh my God, yes, Lucinda and Monique and Rohan, I see you both like shaking your heads vehemently, like, yes, you understand, you agree. So there's a question out here that I will toss your way. And then, of course, you know I have my wrap up, but I have a question that I will ask before I get there. Could you talk about being bilingual? And so this is for any of you that are bilingual. We don't make assumptions here. What do you think are the benefits in today's world of being bilingual in this industry?
Is that for me? Because I'm bilingual?
Well, I know which of you are, so feel free to take that and run with it.
I know Momo speaks at least 4 languages.
At least. I was going to say a bunch.
So go for it. We'll start with Momo, Rohan, and Lucinda. We'll do, happy days. Here we go.
Well, I mean, I think, the key around, being bilingual and having, different language strengths is absolutely critical right now around the nuance. What we are doing in this moment in time is dual purpose, especially for, Rohan and Lucinda and I, because we kind of live in this space of kind of having already had that as part of our edict and part of what we do every day. Now it's even more important to how to get the sensitivity through in a way that everyone can understand. And it doesn't necessarily translate equally. So I'm very, very keen right now in terms of who are you trying to talk to? What do they need to learn? And let's make sure that this happens in bite-sized pieces so that people can retain it. This is also a time around retention and understanding that this is a sustainability initiative. This is not a moment in time. This isn't going to go away. This is something we need to systematically work on and break down. So however that needs to get translated, just like the census or anything else, we want to make sure that every community is getting met where they need to be met, in the language that they need to hear it in, and ultimately in a way that's actionable.
Where's my mic? Can I drop my mic without making noise? Bam, drop the mic. Thank you, Mo. Appreciate that. Rohan, I want to hear your answer. And then I have another question. Lucinda, we'll get you on another question.
Sure. So Hindi doesn't have the same applicability in the U.S. Unfortunately, I do speak 2 languages, but it doesn't have a lot. I don't have a lot of Hindi campaigns in market right now. But I think that the root question about being bilingual, it kind of goes to something a little bit more foundational about having a varied experience and bringing something different to the table and being able to understand a community. And so I am very much in favor of I am jealous of people who have multiple languages, because if you have a true grasp of it, one, if you're native to it, then you have an understanding of the culture and the community, and that can offer you invaluable insight and an opportunity to leverage it for the good. And then, I've always found that people who have the command of multiple languages and they taught themselves, they have that kind of curiosity. You can't train for that kind of curiosity. So people who've taught themselves other languages when it comes to hiring is always a telltale sign of someone who's going to come in and ask questions and want to learn, is going to learn every day. So, I mean, that's my thoughts on it.
And I know you wanted to give me another one, but I like that question.
Go for it, Lucy.
And I think everyone touched on it, but I'm just gonna punctuate it. When you speak another language, and Spanish was my first language, you also, and that goes back to like what I started with, which is about translating. You also, it teaches you empathy, because when you have, when you're trying to communicate, there are words that, for example, the English language falls very short on expressions of love. For example, I would say, if you ever read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Love in the Time of Cholera, in English versus En amor en el tiempo de cólera, it will change your life, right? So I also find that you are able to pick up, because you understand other languages, you understand that there are things that maybe aren't being communicated, but you're listening for them anyway. So I think it teaches you empathy in a strange way, and which is also why it becomes important in marketing campaigns, because so much of it is so nuanced, right? So that was the only thing I wanted to add from that point.
And I appreciate that. All right, it is 2:26. I promised that I would get you all where you needed to be. I promised that I would entertain questions from the audience, which I so seamlessly did with my own. So now I have one question for you, Rohan. I have a question for three of you, and then I'm going to do my fabulous wrap up. So, Nikki's Emma Table Talk, right? So, Rohan, for those interested in pursuing a career in digital marketing, are there any tips, words of advice that will help give our Emmas a leg up given the competition in the world?
Yes, I love that question, and I get asked it a lot due to my position. I'll give you all something I think can help separate you when you're out there looking for your first jobs. Right now, something I keep hearing about from people in your situation is the roles that are out there are kind of being removed, whether they're internships or entry-level positions, because something Lucinda mentioned earlier is really true. Onboarding in a remote environment is very complex. Companies still haven't fully figured it out in a lot of instances. So the opportunities are very complex right now. So what I would say is being in digital marketing does not require a several $100 million budget and dozens of people. What I would say to all of you is if you want to work in digital marketing, build a website. You can literally go to like a Squarespace or a Wix. It's like $10 a month. You can put a website together. Pick a topic that you're interested in, you're passionate about, and optimize it for SEO. And put some analytics on it. Learn how to run a report. Learn the limitations of the reports and have an opinion on it. Take $50 and buy some ads on Facebook or Google or both and see how they work. There's such low barriers to entry. It is money very well spent. Lastly, Excel and PowerPoint are true differentiators if you can take something someone's giving you and make it better. If you can create presentations, you can get a bad presentation and make it look great. That is a skill set. If you can take Excel and build a model, create some charts and graphs, make them look professional, people will seek you out. If you do those few things I just said, and I'll talk with Nikki about doing something a little bit more in depth because it's a very broad topic about this, but foundationally, everything I just said there, if you walked into my office and you had done those things versus the pack, you would have separated yourself by a country mile.
I love that. And I'm holding you to it. You already know we went from 0 to 90 in 2.2 seconds when we met. We are family, and I'm so holding you to that. Okay, last question for my panelists. If you could go back and counsel your younger self, and I'm talking 10 years younger, 2 words, only 2 words, what would you say? Mine is speak up.
No fear.
Monique, Rohan, Lucinda. Monique, you said no fear.
No fear.
Amen.
Time flies.
Chill out.
How appropriate. Well, listen, I hope you all found this to be educational, entertaining, and soul-stirring. Thank you to our panelists. Please be sure to enjoy the remainder of your summer. I'll see you all in Sag Harbor. Bye, bye, bye. And for the rest of you, stay here on the main stage and prep for Emma Talks. But before we bring Naina on board to do a hop-in refresher, we have a few minutes to take a break and grab something from your goodie bag. Stay tuned. Don't go far. We'll be right back.